Yeah, I want to talk about this, the fact that, well, all the work that you do mentoring other coaches, training other coaches, and maybe going back to your prior experiences when you were in charge of hiring
Mm.
coaches. What qualities did you look for in coaches to employ?
Man, so this is always tricky, but from a hiring perspective, the biggest thing that I always looked for was just, man, I need somebody with a little bit of desperation. Like I need, because training's a hard job,
Hmm.
and I think that's because it's extremely difficult to build up a business. Like you have to be pretty dedicated to it. It's not plan B. It's your first option and it's your priority, So I always kind of look at that first. And then from a secondary perspective, like, and this is partly just my own bias, like you have to love to train. Like I'm all about education. I love education. I've spent a ton of time and money in education, but at the end of the day, like you can't be a theorist,
Hmm.
right? Like you have to be somebody who's going to get on the floor and work. And I want coaches who love to train, because the training floor, that is our lab at the end of the day, right? And I want them to really enjoy that process. I want them to be able to train with the other coaches in the facility. Because again, that builds culture with the facility, and culture is typically the number one indicator of a successful facility, right?
Hmm.
And coaches who work out together and train together typically like each other, and they have more respect for one another. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And that's something I always look for when I go into a new gym or I'm consulting with a facility. And something I ask the owner, I'm like, do your guys like, do they work out together? Do they train together? Like, and when they say no, I'm like, that might be kind of a canary, in a lot of cases, like, because that's the common language we all probably speak,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, is fitness or health or performance or whatever. So I look for that. Outside of that, I look at a lot of kind of intangibles, like my hiring process, especially as I got into more of a recruiter and kind of hiring manager in my last two positions with Peak and the other facility was, essentially like you send me your resume first. Like I need to know you have the credentials to be legal, right?
Right.
You have your CPT and your and that kind of thing. And then from there, it's like, I always had people send me like a 5-minute video, answering 3 questions, why they were the right person for the job, what their history was, and why they love to train. And I want to see how you communicate. I want to see, if you'll even get that to me in a timely response, right? Like, and then from there, I'm going to send, a pre-interview intake form, just the same way I would a client. And you're going to answer like, 25 to 30 questions about everything about just, again, your training history, what you like to do, your education, what books you're reading, what your past experiences have been in the industry, and so on and so forth. And then, if that all checks out, I'm going to call you in for an actual interview. And I'm going to set that interview probably at 5 a.m. Because that's when you probably need to be able to show up here to be successful. And if you can't show up for an interview at 5 a.m., I have very little faith that you're going to show up for a client at 5 a.m. on a regular basis. And, for me, depending on what the environment is, but if we're talking the Gen Pop world, service is the number one thing. You can be the best trainer in the world from a nuts and bolts perspective. You can have the alphabet soup behind your name from an acronym perspective. But if you can't provide the service metrics and meet the expectations of the client in front of you, they're not going to stick around, because at the end of the day, like, they don't understand most of the things that go into the programming and the training that we're doing for them.
Hmm.
And they probably don't want to. Like, when I go to my accountant, like, don't teach me tax law, like, tell me what my return is. Like, I don't need to know how the sausage is made. Just do your thing and give me the outputs, right?
Hmm.
So I look at, training almost, and this is a New York, example, but it's like a Broadway play, right? Where, if the client's the audience, like, you've got the stuff that's on stage, and then you've got all the stuff that's happening behind the stage that makes those things work, right? And the clients appreciate like what's on stage. And a lot of that is the service, right? And a
Hmm.
lot of it is that you being there on time, how you're communicating with them, how engaged you are with them, what that looks like, right? And then the stuff that goes on behind, like, the lighting directors, the guys pulling pulling the ropes and the makeup artist and all those things, like that's the education. That's all the stuff that you're putting into the actual play that makes it work, that they're never going to see and probably don't really, acknowledge is there most of the time. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the other side of things is like, you have to be good at service. And, with our development programs, like we help people build their own training model, but we also help people build their own service models. What are your non-negotiables? What are the things that you value the most? What are the things that your demographic values the most? Because if you don't know that, that's priority number one. Like you have to understand what your demographic values and be able to put that in front of them, or you'll never get your foot in the door with them.
Do you feel like service is an underappreciated part of what we do as coaches in the industry at the current time, that most people are maybe lost a little bit in theory and in training, but at the end of the day, like you said, we are providing a service, and the standard to which we can uphold that service is going to be a big determining factor of our success on the long run, if not even on the short term as well.
Oh, 100%. And I think again, trainers have to understand that we're the weirdos, right? Like when we start looking at people who enjoy healthy lifestyles, and then enjoy healthy lifestyles enough to work in the field and then, be in front of them from a professional perspective, like we're a percentage of the population, right? We're the weirdos. We're the people that are obsessed with all of this stuff, right? The theory and the exercise science and all of those things. And we spend a lot of time talking to one another, right? And we form a lot of tribes within the industry and echo chambers and all those things. And I do think that we create kind of this self-importance on a lot of these, systems and theories, and that our clients just don't care that much about. And honestly, probably aren't even at a high enough fitness level to really take advantage of in a lot of cases. Like we kind of lose the forest through the trees in a lot of aspects, depending on who we're working with sometimes. And, I think a lot of trainers keep seeking education is a solution based on their own bias. Like it definitely is almost survivorship bias, where they're like, oh, if I just do one more seminar, like it's going to make me the best trainer. Like and it's like, hey man, like you already have 10 acronyms after your name. Like education's not what's holding you back from, being successful in this field. Like you need to go talk to people. You need to go learn how to be a human being, and be able to provide a better service for them. And I think that's, at the end of the day, when we start looking at like outputs, if intention isn't behind the application, you're not going to get good output. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a squat or a respiration drill or a FRC drill, right? Like if there's not intention there, the output's not there. And if somebody doesn't like what they're doing and enjoy the experience, they're not going to have the intention behind the drill. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of it is, clients not only have to like, doing what they're doing, but they have to enjoy spending an hour with you at some level. And you have to be able to communicate with them. And, especially in the Gen Pop world, like most of my conversations with clients never involved the actual things that we were doing. We were talking about their vacations and their weekend plans and their kids and schools and whatever. Mm-hmm. We weren't talking about why a front foot elevated split squat was going to be better for their mid stance gait than a rear foot elevated split squat, because they didn't care. I would just say, hey, this is the exercise we're doing. And they're like, okay, cool. And I'm like, all right, we're going to do 10 reps each side. Hold it this way. All right, go. Right. And I'd cue as needed or not at all, depending, again, if it wasn't needed, I just let them get through it, and my sign of a great session was the less I had to talk about fitness, the better the session probably was, because one, that means they were engaged in the session, the hour itself. But two, that means I probably picked really good exercises and really good constraints, because I didn't need to do a lot of explaining when it came to the exercises themselves. Mm-hmm. And if I can do that proactively, I can keep them engaged and showing up. And again, like you said, just like you'll have clients that want to be directed. Like every now and then you've got the unicorn client who's like, oh, why are we doing this? Well, enjoy that client, appreciate them, and indulge them. Give them the information they want by all means. Just don't expect every single client to be that person.
Yeah, going back to the education, I want to bounce on that. there's probably also a lot of education for education's sake, where you go take a course or a seminar or a webinar, and then you just tick that box and move forward, and don't take the time to assimilate that information, integrate it into what you do. What's your process when it comes to that, or maybe how to turn it towards the coaches that are listening? How do you encourage coaches to learn? What's the process that you help them develop for that?
A big part of it is, if it doesn't directly apply to the demographic you're training, it's probably not worth your time. Right. And I think that's something that I've made those mistakes in the past. Like I was an education collector for a big part of my career. Like I counted up my certs. I've got over 40 certifications, and I've been to so many other just seminars and other things in my career that, because I love it. Like I just love doing it. And I use very little of it on a daily basis or with my own clients, right? Like I've accumulated a lot of knowledge that I just don't use, or I never will use at this point. And I think that the biggest thing is, if we want to be efficient with our time and our money, especially young coaches, because they're typically limited on both of those things, we have to look at what our clients need, right? So every demographic has a task demand. And if you're working with Gen Pop, a lot of that is really health related. So going and taking that super fancy like sports performance course probably isn't going to have a really good return on investment with the people that you're training, right? Like you might do better with something that's more of a kind of assessment into training type certification, right? If we want to talk about some of those, or things that are going to be more variability based or lifestyle based or hypertrophy based or whatever, and not something that's going to improve their 40 time from like a 7-second to a 6.5, right? Like that probably doesn't matter too much for that person. If you work in a post rehabilitative, environment, and you're kind of a bridge program to that, like, okay, like now we can start looking at a different sector of education, right? If you work in a collegiate weight room, we can start looking at a different sector of education. And it can be broad, it can be super granular depending on how deep you get into it. But I think we have to match the actual education we're pursuing with the needs of the people that we're training, and rather than our own self-interest. And our self-interest is going to be kind of secondary a lot of the times if we're choosing education the right way, because your clients should dictate that thing.
Or if we decide to go for those, let's say, segments of information that we appreciate personally, but maybe just differentiate and be like, okay, I can take that course knowing that I'm probably not going to apply it later. Yeah. If it's for my personal interest, then, that's fine too. But again, split it up in your head and be like, oh, I don't need to apply that if
100%. Yeah, and you can categorize those things over the course of a year. Maybe as you're looking at your annual education calendar or kind of trying to figure out what you're doing, you do 3 courses that are going to fit your client's needs, and you do 1 or 2 that are going to just be purely for your own, your own interest, right? And that's okay. That's not a bad thing either, because we are passionate about this. But I'm always going to look at servicing the people that I'm working with first, and again, those things also aren't always mutually exclusive. Like they might be the same thing. And if they are, that's great. You're in an environment that really matches your passions, but it doesn't always work that way, and that was my experience when I moved to New York. Is I really wanted to go take a lot of sports performance based things, but man, I was working with people who like their knees hurt going up steps, right? Like they were, 40 to 50 pounds overweight. They were pre-diabetic, like I had to really change what my perception of training as a whole was, right? Because my own experience was very much an outlier in the experience of my clients. And I had to figure out a way to be able to service them and serve them and help them through their goals. And that kind of put a hold on some of my own personal interests for a little bit, but not forever. So
yeah, you can always go back to it later if you want to.
For sure.